Guardian Druid is a great tank for any player who enjoys a simple playstyle or the general aesthetics of just being a big old ball of fur. I've done plenty of Guardian Druid guides in the past, so this shouldn't be anything new. This video will be focused on Mythic Plus though, and I'm assuming you already have a relative understanding of the class. We are mostly going to focus on the new talents, the optional builds, and then talk about the rotation and what you should be tracking. Not much has really changed despite the completely reworked talent system, so this should be more of a refresher. Feel free to use the YouTube timeline to skip around to any section that you'd like to see. Quick disclaimer though, there are a lot to these talent trees, which has made defining a meta build much more difficult. While you can find a build that can cover most situations, you should always feel free and encouraged to experiment with different builds that cater to your preferred playstyle, a build that you enjoy, or the type of content that you're doing. Lastly, Blizzard can buff or nerf a class at any time, so that should always be kept in mind. Please take the information in this video with a grain of salt. If anything changes, I'll do my best to update you. If you have any questions, I recommend joining my Discord. That link can be found in the description. Anyways, let's dive in. With the current tuning coming out of the beta testing, this is most likely the build that we're going to be running in Mythic Plus. I'm going to talk about my ideal build and then walk through some changes and other builds that are interesting. Looking at the spec tree, you'll notice that we rush towards the bottom, center, and right side. This is mostly because we can now get Incarnation down to a 2-minute cooldown by utilizing Ursoc's guidance with proper rage spending, and Rage of the Sleeper was recently buffed. This means that we now have consistent damage reduction cooldowns, which is the one thing that Guardian Druid really struggled with for the better half of the last 4 years. Galactic Guardian, accompanied with all of the other Moonfire talents, including Twin Moonfire, Scintillating Moonlight, Ellune's Favorite, and Fury of Nature, really provide most of the damage and healing output, as well as just a solid source of damage reduction and rage generation. Some of the notable changes is that we're playing after the Wildfire and Tooth and Claw. This has given us a pretty massive group healing aura, and the option to hit an Empowered Maul that costs no rage. Lastly, I do get a lot of questions about choosing not to run Circle of Life and Death. With Blood Frenzy, this can actually cause you to have rage overflow, which is bad. It also de-synergizes with Scintillating Moonlight, meaning that you could potentially lose the damage reduction value. If you want to go full damage, feel free to run Life and Death, but in a high pressure situation, we need to find the perfect balance between damage reduction, rage generation, and of course damage output. This build isn't set in stone, but definitely is a build that I prefer in Mythic Plus. We will cover trades in the next section shortly. Quickly looking at the class tree though, this is the setup that I have been enjoying. While many of the balance talents are useless in bear form, the increased attack range, Typhoon, Ursul's Vortex, and Nature's Vigil are pretty useful. Before you type in the comment section about the resto traits, yes, they're fine. You'll miss out on increased attack range and Typhoon as a way to interrupt or displace mobs, but it's fine if you want things like Remove Curse. I guess since we're talking about that, we can cover different builds and trade options. Like I mentioned, you can trade the balance traits for resto talents. This is a fine trade, especially if you need Remove Corruption or you just want more healing in general. This build also gives you 1 free point to use since we can't access Typhoon anymore. You can put this point into more damage or an extra charge of Well-Honed Instincts, but this would only really be the play if you can proc this closer to every 90 seconds instead of the 120. There aren't many other changes in this class tree though. There is a build where you can play Protector of the Pack, but I'm going to cover that shortly. Shifting over to the spec tree, unintended pun, let's walk through some of the changes you can make in this build. In lower content, you can easily drop Earthwarden. This talent is only as strong as the mobs you're facing. If you don't want to play Tooth and Claw, you can also drop Vulnerable Flesh, which will free up 3 points. This is a pretty decent single target loss though, and you'll be missing out on that 15% DR, but you can always pick up Layered Mane and Reinforced Fur. You have to play either of these center paths to actually access Incarnation or any of the other center talents, so just keep that in mind. The last potential drop in the tier 2 of the tree is actually after the Wildfire. This talent is quite busted in Mythic Plus, but it only provides significant value with a more melee-centric composition. If you don't play this talent, you can pretty much backtrack all the way up to Gory Fur. This will leave you with a passive and physical resist build. If you don't want to play Galactic Guardian, you can focus more on the center and left side of the tree. This will leave you playing a build that looks like this, with Ursoc's Fury and Rend and Tear. You can also play Dream of Cenarius with this build, and if you do this, I recommend picking up Protector of the Pack in the class tree. And I think that covers all the optional changes, but again, feel free to experiment. When it comes to stat priority, item level is always going to be king, but if you have the ability to choose, haste will typically take precedence. After that, versatility seems to pull ahead early on in Mythic Plus, with mastering being a fine alternative. Critical Strike sadly doesn't provide as much as a defensive benefit, but if you're looking for just pure damage, this will be your ideal stat accompanied with haste. The base rotation will remain the same. Depending on your build, there might be some slight nuance, but Bear's the easiest tank for a reason. Pull with Moonfire, and you'll want to reapply this whenever you have less than 6 seconds left of the debuff. Then you're going to want to make sure you thrash and then mangle. Both of these have a fairly short CD, so while they're on cooldown, you'll want to fill with swipe or moonfire if your debuff is about to fall off. Gore procs and single target should be used immediately, especially with the new tier set bonus. This new tier set is actually really good and has a unique effect because it will actually keep mangle in our rotation even in AoE situations, like 7+ targets. To fully min-max the damage, you won't need to actually consume your gore procs whenever this happens, but instead every 5 seconds to maintain your tier set buff. If you're interested in pushing the limits of your damage, swipe will be the priority when there are at least 7 or more targets over mangle, as long as you already have your overpowering aura active. Some of the more nuanced spells will be Galactic Guardian and Tooth and Claw usage. With Galactic Guardian chosen, it can consume its own proc, meaning that in AoE, unless you are intentionally trying to apply Moonfire for damage reduction, you can ignore it. If for some reason it's about to expire though, as long as there's 5 or less targets, it'll be worth hitting for the damage alone. In single target, you're going to want to ignore the proc until there's only a few seconds left to maximize your globals spent on Thrash and Mangle or Swipe. The only other nuanced ability is Tooth and Claw. If you look at the damage by itself, roughly 6 or more targets, you'll actually shift your focus from Tooth and Claw to Swipe. Less than 6, Maul procs are fine to prioritize over Swipe. You are mostly gambling on crit though, honestly. That's not to say that you can't consume the proc in AoE, because there might be times where you want to put more damage into a specific kill priority target, and you want the additional 15% damage reduction on a dangerous target. The main benefit of this talent is that it significantly increases our single target damage, in dungeons specifically, and it makes the rotation a little bit more dynamic and engaging. Using cooldowns on Bear isn't too difficult. Rage of the Sleeper should be used on cooldown since it now provides a pretty significant damage increase and only has a 1-minute recharge. Barkskin, with Brambles, Verdant Heart, Matted Fur, and Survival of the Fittest can just be used on cooldown as well. With Incarnation now having a cooldown reduction component, you really want to try to use this as often as possible, but do keep in mind that it's one of the Guardian Druid's stronger cooldowns, so there might be times where you might want to hold on to it. The best example I can think of for this is in Algathar Academy on the Overgrown Ancient boss fight. It makes it really easy to pick up threat and live through the damage. If you're playing Nature's Vigil in the class tree, just hit this on cooldown, but you'll typically want to do this after you've applied a few Moonfires, since this is where most of the healing is actually going to come from. And then lastly, you have Survival Instincts. This should be used whenever you find yourself about to take a large influx of damage, and really should bridge any gaps you don't have Barkskin, Rage of the Sleeper, Incarn, or Nature's Vigil available or active. Even though this class is simple, I always recommend making certain buffs and cooldowns easier to see or track, and you can do this through weak auras. At a bare minimum, you want to track Iron for stacks. I would also recommend tracking your major and minor defensive cooldowns, things like Barkskin, Survival Instincts, Incarnation, Rage of the Sleeper, and Nature's Vigil. When it comes to buffs or procs, Galactic Guardian and Tooth and Claw are both buffs you should probably track if you want to optimize your applications. The last thing I would recommend tracking is the tier set bonus, but if you're hitting Gore every time it procs, this really shouldn't matter as much. It's only for people who really want to min-max. I also see a lot of people asking about my weak aura package in the YouTube comment section. They're all available in my Discord for Twitch subs and Patreon supporters. I have them for all 6 tanks, and I update them quite regularly. I think I covered everything I need to. I wanted to keep this shorter since it's really hard for me to make guides like these because I normally always end up ranting for like hours about all the different builds and synergies and optimizations. If you have any questions that I didn't cover in this video, just check out my Discord. It's a great way to get in contact with me, but also other Guardian Druid and tank players. Just a reminder, these talent trees are supposed to allow you to play different builds to cater to you as a player. Just because I say something or another guide writer says something, you should always take it with a grain of salt and feel encouraged to test different talents. I can't stress that enough. I haven't been streaming much lately with all my projects that I've been working on, but starting with the release of Dragonflight, I plan to swing right back into streaming a few days and nights a week, so feel free to check me out there. Massive shout out to Kato, Teddy, and Heartless, and of course all my other Patreon supporters. Without them, there'd be much less of whatever this is. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.